Episode 100, Breaking the Silence at the Blas Aguilar Adobe Museum in San Juan Capistrano. How many of you have heard of the San Juan Capistrano mission? Probably many of you have. It was one of our California missions, I believe the seventh in chain of 21 missions all along the California coast. Now, how many of you know what was there before the San Juan Capistrano mission? Before the San Juan Capistrano mission, there was the Ashaman people, an indigenous people that had a thriving culture and tradition here in Orange County, California. If you're finding that you didn't know this, I don't blame you because I didn't either, actually. So near this San Juan Capistrano mission is the Blas Aguilar. It's one of 40 adobes that formed a pueblo around San Juan Capistrano. There's actually a museum there which has a number of different artifacts, but probably what I valued most from my experience today was having a guided tour from indigenous folks or descendants of indigenous folks. And one individual was Domingo, a descendant of the Ashaman people. He shared about the Ashaman land, traditions, cultures, and I could immediately sense a very deep respect and connection to the land as he talked about like the plants and the roots and the nuts and the stones and how that allowed them to create baskets and provided food and jewelry. It's almost as though when he was talking and sharing, I could almost see and hear the Ashaman people bustling about their business doing these very things. And apparently, compared to Mexico City, the colonization around San Juan Capistrano actually happened much later toward the 1700s. And so from here comes a story of resilience and a story of adaptability from the Ashaman people. And Domingo would say, this is who we are. And this is what we are proud of. And this kind of reminds me of what we've been talking about a little bit here in Ed Family about being culturally honoring, because we've been so culturally blessed as a nation. And one of the areas that we've been culturally blessed are our indigenous people. We then proceeded to a seminary. And once again, another descendant of the indigenous Ashaman people, Jerry, talked about breaking the silence. Now, Jerry talked about breaking the silence because his grandparents, he's this guy in red, he's an older gentleman, and his grandparents of that generation very rarely talked about their ancestry and their descendants and where they were from. So he, had a really close relationship with his grandmother. And then when asked, hey, I want to know more about my family, she then, said, like, why do you want to know about this? She was actually fearful to tell a part of her story. Many Hispanic Latino folks are actually mestizo, meaning descendants of Spanish and indigenous descent. But a lot of folks did not talk about their indigenous heritage. In fact, during that time, his grandmother's time, names were often changed, culture was forgotten, the language disappeared, and there was a lot of fear that passed from generation to generation. Generations not allowed to speak the language. And then when Jerry asked his grandmother, what was it like to live during this time under this time, she said it was very brutal. Very brutal. And this kind of reminded me a little bit of Korea, actually, when he was sharing this, when Korea was brutally colonized by another country between 1910 to 1940, where once again, the language was not allowed to be taught. Students went to school and did not learn Korean and learned another language. Their names were changed. And that was a very long and difficult time as well. And although I am Korean American and not Korean, this Korean American identity is still interconnected with Korea. And Jerry said something that I thought was very powerful. He said, breaking the silence means talking about the good and the bad. the good and the bad. And so, you know, the reason why, you know, I even came out here was because, as you know, I've co-authored 2 courses, the Asian American Studies and the Korean American Studies course. And when I initially proposed these 2 courses, I actually got some feedback back saying you might want to include some more information about indigenous people, you know. And I was thinking in my mind, you know, I really don't know enough. And so that's one of the reasons I signed up for this workshop. But I was reminded today about that breaking the silence means talking about the good and the bad. And it also reminded me of what I love sharing about supporting our students to know their story, to tell their story, to have others listen with empathy and respect, and to do something good with that story. And a part of that story is telling your story and breaking the silence. So if you're interested in this cultural tour for educators, it was free for educators, co-sponsored by the Orange County Department of Education, Dr. Marika Manos. I'll put her information in the description, as well as Vanguard University and Juan Capistrano. From Vanguard University, here's a picture of me and Dr. Jeff Hittenberger. Did this video help you to think about the indigenous peoples, their story, the intersectionality among stories? If so, give it a like. Did you want to hear more stories about culturally relevant pedagogy, ethnic studies, Asian American studies, Korean American studies? Then be sure to subscribe. I have about a new video coming out weekly. This is Dr. Jeff from Ed Family, signing out.